Thanks for tuning in. I'm Andy Zopp, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. On the roundtable this week, journalists Hugo Balta, Francia Garcia Hernandez, along with City Bureau's Morgan Malone, join me to discuss the ongoing budget crisis at City Hall, as well as the continued human resource challenges that threaten to derail the mayor's administration. I'll also sit one-on-one with one of the more vocal opponents of the mayor's desire to raise property taxes, 36th Ward Alderman Gilbert Villegas. We'll get started on the other side of a short break. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton. Join me Mondays at 7 p.m. for Behind the Confident Smile as I sit in conversation with incredible, dynamic, and complex Chicagoans who peel back the layers, living lessons, the joy, and the pain behind their confident smiles. You can watch on CanTV 19, cantv.org, and CanTV Plus app.
Mayor Brandon Johnson's string of bad fortune shows no signs of subsiding as he continues to battle with an increasingly weary city council over the 2025 budget and another exit of a senior member of his team under a cloud of allegations of misconduct. To help us try to make sense of it all, I'm joined at the roundtable by roundtable regulars, the executive director of City Bureau, Morgan Malone, publisher of Latino News Network, Hugo Balta, and Block Club Chicago reporter, Francia Garcia Hernandez. Welcome back, everybody.
Thank you.
You know, what's going on with this budget? It's December. Don't we usually have a budget by now? So what do we think are the big sticking points?
Well, I think the biggest sticking point is the mayor himself and his inability to be the so-called collaborator in chief. When we talk about collaboration, it's about listening, it's about putting things on the table and not trying to force feed a budget that started with $300 million of proposed property taxes. Then 2 weeks later, or maybe a week later, 150. We're now down to 60 million. If I'm in the city council, I'm saying just hang tight. In another week, we'll get 30 million. So I think his lack of communication, we talked off camera about who he surrounds himself. The biggest issue is the mayor himself.
Well, do you agree? I mean, there's an argument that he's listening and trying to address the concerns of aldermen. Francia, what are you hearing?
There is a vocal group at City Council that has been acting and saying, look, the numbers show it. They commissioned a poll, and that poll showed, many Chicagoans reject property tax increases. They're showing they don't favor the mayor's approval rate, right? So it seems like that has been a way of City Council to pressure him into not raising property taxes as much, but it also seems like it is falling on deaf ears a little bit, just because negotiations stalled. Now there is more pressure to get the budget approved, but there is still this push to get some property tax increase. And I know it's necessary because the city has a deficit, a very big deficit, but it doesn't seem like these negotiations are happening in a place of collaboration. It's more of who is going to win, as if this was a contest and not weighing in the future of the city and how it's going to finance the services to the many people who live here and call it home.
How much of it do you think, though, is that it's a new, relatively young and inexperienced city council, not inexperienced, but a lot of people who haven't been there, young by the fact in terms of terms. How much of that is part of that, and how much of that is just not effective collaboration? What do you think?
I mean, Andy, you've had an illustrious career, but going into City Hall, it's a learning curve. If you've never been in government before, it takes a long time to learn how it works. It takes a term to wrap your mind around all the things to do. I personally, what we're hearing is that people are excited about the fact that their aldermen are proposing solutions. I think that there's a lot of backroom negotiations that happen during preparing each budget, but you don't get to see which individual aldermen are saying, no, I think we should propose this solution. No, I think we should propose this solution. All of that happens behind closed doors. So I'm hearing from people in community that they're proud of the advocacy from their aldermen. People are seeing more of a democracy in this moment, even if it's messy, even if it's not the ideal collaboration. They have more faith and trust in the job their alderman is doing right now, which is ideal in my mind.
Yeah.
But if I'm with the mayor, show me a little bit more of that, right? It shouldn't be happening in the back office. Put it in the front office, because he needs to demonstrate very openly that type of collaboration, discussion and debate is happening. And then it's also about not just listening but hearing. Send a proposal that actually points to that collaboration, because right now, that's not what we're getting.
That's fair. What I'm more so reacting to is just what people are saying about hearing their alderman be pressed forward, media forward, of like, regardless of what's happening here, I do have an idea. Right. And you just don't get to see that so much, because you get to spend time with your alderman on city services. You don't get to see them be legislators or thoughtful proposers in the way that we're getting to see right now. And frankly, while there's a lot of turmoil, that feels like the best of what Chicago should be having. I want people to get to consensus, but I'm also excited to see my alderman active.
Although I think there's an argument, it is a little, I don't know, for me it feels a little traumatic, right? It doesn't feel like anybody, yes, people have ideas, but doesn't feel like there's a plan or a path. And that's stressful in an already stressful environment. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, what I've heard from people in the neighborhoods is they're also starting to see more of what Morgan was saying, the process of how the budget is approved, but they're also concerned about the lack of transparency, whether that is happening now or that comes from administrations in the past. And I think that's part of what we were just talking about, the mayor's administration, city council being more forthcoming about where the city's finances come, because when what they hear in the media or what's on social media is, we inherited this from prior administrations, or we're negotiating, but in my campaign I said this and now I'm saying that, the true facts of where the city stands, the city's finances are, get lost. So that lack of transparency creates this barrier to trust and to understanding that how government works, and then people are more prone to believe the city's falling apart and we're not going to be able to fund our city next year and our property taxes are going to go up. I still hear from neighborhood people who say we're going to get $300 million in property tax increases. That has been voted down, but that was the main message, and that's what's stuck in people's minds. So there has to be some change in how things are communicated and when and how a budget is approved. Otherwise, it creates this space for misinformation and for distrust.
I think it's also, last time we were together, you mentioned in comparison, Chicago, the population versus the budget, it's apples and oranges with other municipalities, other cities in regards to what we're paying. But to your point, I think it's transparency, more education, but meeting sort of halfway. You want the taxpayers to take some of the brunt. You have to start talking about budget cuts that look into, unfortunately, perhaps some services being cut and people being laid off. If you're looking for someone to pay more in property taxes, that needs to be as a last resort. Once you've already spoken about tightening the belt in government and making it more efficient, which this administration has talked about. So I think there's too much rhetoric in one, property taxes, which takes a headline. That's a whole other story in regards to media's coverage of this process. But there's not enough from the Brandon administration to talk about meeting halfway.
Right. Although I think they have, proposed some things. I also think, to go back to collaboration and listening, he's moved on CPD, right? And after hearing from people closer to the consent decree and the issue, they're recognizing that that may not be the place to make those cuts. I don't know. Are you hearing about places where they're thinking about making cuts that make more sense?
I have not heard anything, to be honest. One thing I can say, and I was just reading the Chicago Tribune reported today, there are some conflicts between unions now that are starting to play out. SEIU 73 against the CTU for CPS. But I think these are some of the other considerations that are playing in the back of the mayor's administration mind, and probably city council as well, that any cut to any city agency would involve negotiations with unions in many cases. That could turn sour really quick. So this news that came out today, I think, is showing where the mayor's administration and city council has to be careful in evaluating where they make cuts and what's on the table and what's at stake.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we are entered into multi-year collective bargaining agreements. But I think at the end of the day, Chicago's finances have to be all hands on deck anyway. Every department, every alderman, and the mayor. We're here now. And so we're just in the beginning of what our real deficit is going to be. We could make cuts to staff right now. That doesn't change that a number of departments have fiscal cliffs for next year. So even if we come up with solutions for this year to close the gap or close it a little bit more, are those solutions going to be mature enough to hold up next year when the deficit is 1x, 1.5x, given a loss of federal funding or other conditions that are not within our control? So the idea that like right now the property taxes aren't on the table, okay, they probably will be in 2 or 3 years. There are a lot of cuts that are probably going to be on the table that we're not actually bracing for impact for. There's always conversation about ROM closing the schools. I would not be surprised if there are more school closures in the next 4 years. CPS is hitting a fiscal cliff. They also have pensions to cover. We're asking them to cover other things. The Department of Education, there's already a bill in the feds right now saying that we should cut the Department of Education. So where's the federal funding that currently subsidizes CPS going to come from? So I think we just need to get creative. We need to get in a room and lock in, but it's bigger than this budget. We have to think short term and long term, and I'm not hearing sustainable solutions that support us long term from anyone with consideration of the risk that's coming and the resilience we need.
So you bring up a really good point, right? I agree with everything you've said. But do you really think they're going to be able to come up with something with 3 weeks left in the month? No. They're going to come up with another Band-Aid solution just to get us to January and not risk the government shutting down. His proposal came 2 weeks later than it should have at the end of October instead of in the beginning of October. So in order to actually do what you said, this needed to happen 6 months ago, not 3 weeks till the deadline. What we're going to get is a watered down Band-Aid that no one's going to agree that hopefully will build a bridge for some of what you talked about.
Yeah, I hope people get started on January 1st and a working group.
A great point. So let's move on to another super easy topic. Let's talk about CPS. So I saw an article today that says that in addition to the people who've been elected, looks like the people he appointed can stay, right? That there was some question as to whether or not he would have to reappoint others depending on who got elected in the ward. So it looks like we might actually have a board. How are they, do you think they're thinking about the current superintendent? I know there was recently a letter, right, from the principals supporting the superintendent?
Yeah, a group of principals sent a letter to the mayor saying that they're in favor of this current board to wait to make decisions in leadership. And we're talking about, of course, the CEO of CPS. And it was met with quick rebuke. We were talking about how he was very short with a reporter making a legitimate question, but it wasn't even just in how he was not answering the question. It was about how he was acting towards a journalist who happened to be a woman. And I think this is starting to, the frustration that he's feeling on all fronts with the budget, with decisions having to do with the CEO, it's chipping away, it's frustrating him, and it's showing some of the inexperience that he has, as well as not getting the right advice in regards to dealing with collaboration, which isn't easy. When you have 50 city council members, when you're dealing with the size of CPS, it's difficult. But this is not a situation where you let your frustrations get the best of you.
As usual, you all move this time along so incredibly fast, but what an important conversation and what great points you made about transparency and the importance for the public to hear about some of these important issues and what challenges, what the challenges that the mayor faces. It is not an easy job. Thank you, and you've helped share that and show that today. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. It was a great roundtable, and we will be right back after this short break.
I'm Sean Cattouse. Welcome to The Compassionate Competitor. Each episode will explore the mental, physical, and emotional toll as well as the rewards that come along with high-performance athletics. Join the conversation on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, stream live on cantv.org or on the new CAN TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
With a looming deadline to approve the 2025 city budget, the relationship between the mayor and city council appears to be more strained than ever, as scrutiny of and opposition to Johnson's proposals and processes intensifies. Here to shed some insight on it all, I'm joined by 36th Ward Alderman Gilbert Villegas. Alderman Villegas, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for having me.
So this is not your first rodeo, but it might be one of the more crazy ones that you've participated in when it comes to the budget.
Yeah, this is my 10th budget that I'm involved in here, and it's been quite the adventure so far.
Yeah. So you and 13 other aldermen commissioned a poll just to get a feel for the public. Why did you do that, and what did you learn from the poll?
Well, I think that when you're proposing a budget, and a lot of folks are talking about values, I think that we wanted to get some other questions asked about the direction of the city. Who do they entrust with the budget process more, the mayor or the city council? And as a result, there was some very interesting things that came out of it. And so you saw that 60% of the respondents, 60+% of the respondents trust their alderman on the budget process versus 10% for the mayor. Wow. Then you also heard that as it relates to property tax increases, the mayor had proposed initially $300 million. It was defeated overwhelmingly 50-0. And then he came back to the drawing board with another $150 million property tax. And so we polled that question as well. And 78% of respondents said that they would actually support an opponent against their alderman if they supported the $150 million property tax.
Wow.
So
how many is that? 78%?
78% of respondents said they would support an opponent against their alderman if they voted for the property tax increase. That's all to say that the narrative that the mayor's putting out there around we need more revenue without creating efficiencies is the wrong message. Right. I think that most people, when you talk to people and you say, if we're able to create efficiencies, right-size government, and then if we're short, go to the taxpayers and say, hey, we did all this, but we need an extra fill in the blank in order to close the gap, then that's something that's a lot more palatable. But just to sit there and say, we're not going to do anything, we're going to charge you more money for the same services that you're getting, I think is irresponsible. Might
the mayor not say, we'll do some, but if we do too many efficiencies, your services will get cut, and then people will be unhappy about that. And so, I mean, how do you balance that in that process? Because obviously, if you start, efficiencies in government largely means people, right? Yeah. So how do you manage that?
Well, so again, I chair the Economic Capital and Technology Committee, and I've been a huge proponent of putting technology at the forefront about the way we deliver services. If there's a way to modernize it, then we should take a look at it. And when we talk about efficiencies, that's what I'm talking about. I had proposed two ideas. One of them would have saved $40 million. The other one would have saved $50 million for a total of $90 million. Now, it's not $1 billion, right, but you can't eat an apple with one bite.
Right.
So what we did was we went ahead and took a look at the 2020 budget, which is roughly $12 billion, and took a look at the 2025 proposed budget, which is $17+ billion. Wow. So over 5 years, you've seen the budget increase $1 billion a year. And so, unfortunately, the revenue that's coming in is unsustainable. And so, again, there has to be a right sizing here. When we did this exercise of going from 2020 to 2025, and then incorporating inflation as well as the collective bargaining agreements in there, we came up with a total that was $568 than what the mayor proposed. $568 million less than what the mayor proposed.
Okay.
So the mayor's proposed $300 million or $150 million. Right. We found something that's $568. So there's room to negotiate.
Right.
And I think that's what we're trying to do is force the negotiation because as some of your viewers may not know, we get involved in the budget at the very end.
Right.
And so the mayor's OBM, the Office of Budget Management, is working on their budget for months. We get it dropped in our laps, and we have 2-3 weeks to evaluate it and come back and try to dissect it. Now, mind you, the OBM staff for the mayor is 50 plus people. Our office of the Committee on Financial Analysis is 3 people.
Right.
So we need more resources from the legislative standpoint. And as we're dealing with day-to-day city services, we don't have the staff on our aldermanic team
Right.
to take a look at analyze budgets. I mean,
Right.
first of all, I can't afford to pay an economist
Right.
to be on my team, and at the same time worry about the economists making sure the garbage, the constituents are getting garbage cans.
Right, right. So, what about pensions? How much of an impact does that have on the budget year over year?
Yeah. So the pensions, this has been an issue that's been going on for decades.
Right, exactly.
And so this started under the Daley administration, under the Rahm administration. He had put some measures in place to begin to try to correct it.
Right.
Now we have this looming deadline imposed by us by Springfield.
Right.
And so I've talked to the administration, well, why don't we go back to Springfield, talk about the actual payments that we're making now, having an opportunity to extend the deadline, codify that we're going to stick to the actual payment amounts that we're doing now, and then that will limit the ramp. Because right now we're trying to climb this ramp, and it's just eating too much of our corporate fund.
Right. And you would think certainly a number of the legislators in Springfield are from the city.
Well, interesting stat. So for the first time in decades, we don't have the Speaker of the House or the Senate President from Chicago.
Right.
And you also have more Democrats that are elected outside of Chicago that make up the Democratic caucus down in Springfield.
Right.
So anytime Chicago's asking for something, and we don't have the leadership in charge of it, all of a sudden you get other municipalities going, hey, well, we want that too.
Right.
And so next thing you know, it just gets too big.
Right, that makes a challenge. On the other hand, Chicago is an economic engine for the state. So helping it get stable in the long run, financially stable, would seem, you'd think the legislature would see that as a benefit to them as well, to the state, and therefore to them.
I think they do. Unfortunately, this administration has been very weak down in Springfield. Very weak. Their IGA team and the government affairs team has just been not doing a great job down in Springfield. Just take a look at the recent snafu of the $40 million debt that now is being added on to the budget, to the deficit that we have right now. So there just isn't enough collaboration from Springfield and the city of Chicago, and that starts with having a good IGA team down there that's acting in the best interest of the city, and then the mayor talking to the leaders and the governor to figure out what the city needs in order to make sure that the state prospers.
Right. So, what are we going to get there? Are we going to get a budget?
So, we've never been here before, and there's a lot of aldermen that are working to try to figure out if there's a solution. The one thing this mayor has done is really brought a lot of interesting coalitions together, whether it was on ShotSpotter, whether it was on Clean Affordable Building Ordinance, or whether it was on the oversight of CPS board confirmation. So there's a lot of aldermen. We're all talking, trying to figure out what's palatable. But I think the narrative that we all agree on is that we had to find efficiencies and right sizing first, and then try to figure out what the revenue recipe is going to be. There's been a lot of things on the table, but we had to make sure that we're messaging out to business as well, that we're open for business, because we need investment. The only way to grow the economy is to get more people and get more people investing here.
Right, absolutely. Well, Alderman, thank you. Your experience, I think, is really, really needed right now. So I'm grateful. We're grateful to have you there, and thank you for all the hard work. I know this is not an easy job. So thank you, and thank you for taking time to be with me today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I'll be right back with some final thoughts on the other side of a short break. Stay with us.
I'm Darius Hillman, inviting you to join me for the Chicago Noir, the news magazine that highlights and showcases the African American experience in the Windy City. Tune in each month on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN-TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
Presidential elections usually bring voters to the polls, but not in 2024. In fact, Chicago had the second lowest voter turnout it has had in 80 years, according to the Chicago Board of Elections. Almost 1/3 of eligible Chicago voters decided to stay home, decided that their voices didn't matter. And this was in a year when Chicago voters elected members to the Chicago Public School Board for the first time ever. Apparently, for more than 30% of Chicagoans, educating our children and the equality of our public schools was just not that important. This is disturbing. Local elections in Chicago are as crucial as national ones, often having a more immediate impact on residents' daily lives. While presidential races draw significant attention, it is the local offices, mayor, city council, and county officials that influence essential issues such as public safety, education, housing, and infrastructure. Despite their importance, local elections often suffer from lower voter turnout compared to national races. This is true despite the fact that local officials wield significant influence over critical services such as public transportation, sanitation, and zoning laws. Increased voter participation in local elections could lead to more representative governance and better alignment of policies with community needs. When citizens choose not to vote, especially in local elections, the consequences can be significant, both for individuals and the broader community. Low voter turnout diminishes the legitimacy of elected officials, often resulting in governance that may not align with the needs or desires of impacted residents. One of the most immediate consequences of low voter turnout is underrepresentation of certain groups, particularly communities of color, young people, and low-income residents. When these voices are absent from the ballot box, elected officials may prioritize the interests of more affluent or politically active demographics. In Chicago, this has historically led to disparities in resource allocation for schools, infrastructure, and public safety across different neighborhoods. Similarly, local referendums and ballot measures, which often determine critical issues like tax rates, school funding, and zoning laws, can pass or fail by a narrow margin due to low participation. This can result in policies that may not serve the broader community needs, further exacerbating economic and social inequalities. Ultimately, when large segments of the population don't vote, the entire community pays a price. Public services may decline, social inequalities can worsen, and trust in government may erode. Conversely, when more people engage in the electoral process, it leads to more inclusive decision-making and policies that better reflect the collective will and welfare of the city. Voting is not just a right. It is a shared responsibility. By participating in every election, citizens can ensure that their voices are heard, their communities are represented, and their futures are shaped by leaders who reflect their values and priorities. In Chicago and beyond, the act of voting is a critical investment in a better, more equitable society. That's our time. Thank you for tuning into Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Until next time, be well and well informed.